Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Let's rock and roll, my good sir.
Jared, welcome to 50 Tastes of Gray. Why don't you tell everybody where you're at?
Well, I'm in Oklahoma.
Oh, fantastic. That's a hotbed of delicious culinary world, isn't it?
Well, it's actually coming a long way. About 5 years ago, the culinary scene really picked up. Right now, it's going through a culinary renaissance. It's in full bloom. It is incredible to be here right now.
Oh, that's amazing. It's not something that people would automatically associate with fine food and culinary arts.
Not at all, but we have some incredible offerings here with really good chefs. Some of them are importing the best ingredients across the United States, and some of them are taking Oklahoma ingredients and elevating them to the highest level they can.
What would be a few sample Oklahoma ingredients that people are doing that with?
Well, we have okra, which is definitely an Oklahoma ingredient. We have our own mushrooms. A lot of people are foraging. A lot of people are also growing their own produce. And so whenever you just take it from the Oklahoma, that famous red dirt soil, and you can take that and elevate it rather than, bringing in the freshest mushrooms from this region or truffles or foie gras. It hits a little different level.
I was reading through your bio and I saw that you were a school psychologist prior to being a restaurant reviewer. Can you take us through a little bit of that part of your life?
Well, I'm still a nationally certified school psychologist. I've worked in public education for 15 years now. This will be the 15th year. And supporting students with disabilities is just a passion for me. And it allows me not just to support students with disabilities, but all students that I come across. And, a lot of times those students, their voice gets lost. And if I could be a voice and support them so they can find their own voice, all the more.
Your specialty is with disabled kids, yeah?
It's with all kids. It is identifying students with disabilities, then coming up with plans, either behavioral or academic, to help support them.
What brought you into that, I guess, subspecialty of psychology?
I really like the aspect of education and giving back, especially because I realized a long time ago that a lot of people don't think of teachers. They think I've got here today, but education is so important to America. It's so important to advancing society as a whole. And I realized that identifying the strengths and weaknesses within a society was something really interesting to me. And then I could take that through testing and other means and find out what's going on so we can maximize potential. It doesn't matter if it's autism or if you're somebody's gifted. It's all about finding those strengths and weaknesses and working through them.
When you're working with a child in school, trying to get maybe past some issues or hurdles, do you use psychological techniques? Do you use talk therapy? Do you use games and exercises, or a combination of all of those?
So I could use some of that. Sometimes I use different methods, but my primary focus in school systems is the testing aspect and supporting teachers by giving behavior plans and making suggestions. And so the therapy is something that's sort of by the wayside for me. It's not that I don't have training in it. It's not that I don't do it. It's just not something I'm currently doing. And so, whenever it comes to a lot of those issues, communication is key. Underlying and demonstrating what is the breakdown of communication? What is the anxiety? What is the underlying condition? Because once you can figure out the underlying issue, you can work on a plan to get past it.
The transition from doing mostly psychological work with kids into the food world, take us on that journey for a little while.
Well, absolutely. So if you think about it, the two are tied. And I'm big onto the five senses: taste, touch, sight, and smell. And a lot of times the food decisions we make are environmental, cultural, combined with our biological practices. If we smell something or we taste something, it all is imprinted in the brain. We like it, we don't like it. And so that's sort of where I merge the two realms together, because it's a fascinating mergence. It's something that I found is how much does the environment influence even your taste buds and the chemistry? Because, from an early age, you have things that you like. Now, we can go back to each one of those things, and it's probably something you saw in childhood, something your mother made for you, something your father made for you, McDonald's. And so you go through this, and then you get into patterns, because that's what humans do. We seek patterns. And so all our lives, we are driven to liking the things we like, and food is no exception. So I then really stop and think, do you really like what you like, or have you just been conditioned all your life to like it? And you don't really know what else is out there. And maybe there are things that you like even more, and what you like now is nothing but, I wouldn't even try it. But we stick in
Right.
the same rut because it's comfortable and we don't like change.
So then you're saying that cultural backgrounds really influence our food preferences. Is that correct?
Cultural, society, everything influences our food preferences. From what your mother made to Lay's potato chips advertising. I always sit there and think nowadays, what plays a bigger role? What your family brings in, or what the advertising of food vendors, how much influence they have. And I'm starting to think really that food vendors have more influence across cultures than we could ever think. And it all goes back to the perceptions we have of food dating back to even the Great Depression of where we're at today.
You know, the foods that are eaten in other countries is just so drastically different from our own.
100%.
And when I was leading food tours here in Hawaii for 16 years, people would come to Hawaii and we'd serve them spam, for instance, which is a little bit way out, but not
Sure.
really. And I said, it's just, it's just a pork product, just a ham
Uh-huh.
product. It's no different than your hot dog. Have you ever eaten a hot dog? But in other countries, they're eating insects and organs and things that we would never be able to wrap our head around for the most part. So it really is a cultural difference, isn't it?
Significant cultural difference. And some of that's starting to creep into America, caviar, foie gras, sweetbreads. Whenever you think about what these are, they're the highest level of the organ products, but they're still organ products. Crickets are now more prevalent in Mexican restaurant cuisine. But, each culture is vastly different with our food. I think that, like I said, the Great Depression had a big influence on America because if you think about it, when our great grandparents or our grandparents grew up during the Great Depression, it was finish everything on your plate. Everything was so tight. Well, that transitioned, I believe, after World War II. That mentality never went away. And so then we went into the TV dinners. TV dinners were bigger. And then it went into the microwave. And now it's in a box. And so all of these things play a role in our cultural heritage. But that whole idea of finish on your plate still resonates whether you really need to finish everything on your plate. And I have to wonder, is that one of the things, our culture, our histories during the Great Depression, which has spiked the obesity crisis that's going on in America? And how do we get away from that? Because now we correlate how much food we get, how much little we spend, and how good it is takes a back seat. Because a lot of people will say, that's not good. $24.99 for a burger? Well, it could be the best burger on planet Earth, but they're like, no thanks. Give me McDonald's burger. Give me twice as much food for $15. There's an issue. It's not nearly as good, and you're consuming more calories. So it's a vicious cycle that plays into it. But the average American doesn't sit there and think of these things.
You make a really good point. I definitely want to interweave the obesity issue that's going on worldwide, not just in America right now, and choosing the wrong foods to eat. And my understanding is that at one point you were overweight and you kind of took that challenge by the hand, started to learn about food, learning to eat correct. Could you tell us what you did to change it around for yourself and get I don't know if you reversed your disease or whether you lost weight or some combination of the factors, but could you explain a little bit of that to us?
Well, in 2016, I was 376 pounds, and I lost my father, and my father was instrumental in my childhood, especially when it comes to food. And at the time, I went to the bathroom after I lost him, and I couldn't see certain appendages anymore. And I also went through an injury where I tweaked my back. I herniated a disc in my back, and I was no longer recovering. My body was not the thought of immortality. The immortality of youth had slipped because I normally bounce back from a tweaked back. This took me almost over 3 years to get over. And so instead of using food as a coping mechanism, I used food as a strength to say, I'm going to do this. And so I lost 176 pounds in a year. And I did that through understanding how calories work, how the body works. The body is essentially a battery. And each day, your body needs X amount of energy to just function. Just sitting here today, I'm burning calories. Calories is nothing more than a measurement of energy. And so if I sit here all day long, I'm burning calories. If I eat more calories than my body needs to sit here, I'm going to gain weight because our bodies love to take the calories we don't use and store it in all the places we don't want it to be stored. So once I understood that, and once I could figure out how many calories my body used, I had two options. I could either burn it off through exercise, or I could restrict what I was eating. And so I, through that strength, decided to do both, and the pounds just melted off.
Well, that's
And
fantastic.
that was the key. But this is what I realized about myself and about Americans. I ate better. So instead of, a pound of chips, I would supplement, and every day I'd eat at least a pound of fruit. And I'd figure out what fruit. Peaches, strawberries, blueberries, fruits that had lower calories per gram than higher sugar fruits, apples. And so that would fill me up more. So I didn't feel hungry later. And that is how I lost the weight is I kept track of how much I weighed, because that lets me, as you lose weight, your body doesn't need as much energy to function. And that's how I avoided the plateau. I never hit a plateau throughout that entire process because I understood how the plateau works.
Well, that's very interesting. Now, isn't going into food reviewing, restaurant reviewing, and so on, a kind of slippery slope for someone with the history of yours?
Absolutely. It is this history slope. It's also being self-aware and having those conversations with yourself and realizing it's a lifestyle change. If I'm going to have that meal, that's the only thing I might eat today, but make sure that I still get my fruit in, make sure that I drink plenty of water, make sure that I am priming my body to not consume more than I should.
That's so interesting. And by the way, is that your doggies in the background having a nice little fight? Oh, they're so cute.
I'm so sorry. Yes, that's Izzy. She's here it is.
No problem at all. I just heard that, and I thought it was very cute.
This is Iz. I figured your audience might like dogs. She wasn't having a fight. She was rubbing on the floor because.
Oh, what a cutie! What's her name?
This is Isabella. This is Iz.
Isabella.
She is such a sweetheart.
Yeah, let her roam free and have fun. We're good here with that.
Okay.
What I was going to bring up was that I rarely, if ever, tell people what to eat unless they ask me. And I really, really respect that you've been able to do this and get your life together and your health together and so on. But with all that said, don't you find that fruit being so high in sugar and carbohydrates actually kind of lends itself to inflammation and metabolic health reversal and things that come along with an overconsumption of sugars? Because I know you've been successful with it, but I'm just wondering, because the science that I've done has all been the lower the carb, the higher the protein, the better you're going to be in the long run. So speak to that for a moment.
Well, absolutely. It's baby steps. So the first thing that I would never recommend doing is telling someone they're overweight what they need to do. They have to you can make suggestions, but what I realize is a lot of people have to come to their own conclusions. And so the first step is understanding calorie restriction and burning calories. Then we can get into the macros. And then we can discuss what are the better fruits. So for example, also, as you know, through your research, this is one thing that's interesting, and it's a catch-22. A lot of the produce we eat is not ripe at all, but the more ripe the fruits are, the more sugar they produce. And so whenever I was trying to research into, for me, what fruits, it was what was going to fill me up that had less sugar. For example, strawberries generally have less sugar than pineapple. I really stuck to the berries is where I stuck to it. I stuck to apples, but it was a Granny Smith apple, which is not nearly as sweet as some of the other apples. Am I correct? I could be wrong. And then I would also start to supplement with things like broccoli and cauliflower and spinach and things like that as well.
I see. Okay. And so you're still kind of staying within that understanding of food and diet, so to speak?
Yes, to this day, I still eat a pound of fruit, and now I've started to integrate vegetables considerably more, especially carrots. I like carrots because, again, it's about staying full and getting there so I don't overeat later.
Right. Now, tell us a little bit about, now that we've spoken a little bit about diet, I want to talk about the transition of why did you become a restaurant reviewer? And now, when we look on YouTube and we watch your videos, which we really enjoy, by the way, I wonder, how does a psychologist get into reviewing restaurants?
Well, a couple of fold. So the first thing was, My history, whenever I was growing up, was in fine dining. And so I went to Alinea years ago, about 10 years ago. I've been there several times, and I went to Michelin-starred before I even knew what Michelin-star was.
Uh-huh.
And so in Oklahoma, I've been here for 26 years. For about 16 years, I was like, well, what's in Oklahoma? And so when I go Google and Yelp, it was the chain restaurants. And finally, whenever I found a restaurant and I started to change my perceptions, I really started to love that. But when I started really trying to go into, I want to know what's the best in Tulsa? What I realized was Google and TripAdvisor, they had more or less the chains, because if you pay for advertising, the algorithm's going to hit it up. So when I read the 5-star reviews, this was fantastic, great price, wonderful. That doesn't tell me anything. 5 stars, 1 star, parking sucked, person was rude. That doesn't tell me anything about the food. So I started to look to see, what about food writers? Well, so I looked up some food writers. And what I realized was a lot of the food writers and a lot of the newspapers, they're there really in tandem with the restaurants to support the restaurants. And so that's not generally an objective critique. Some of them are. And so I decided I wanted to do something. I wanted to do a little niche, try and write and discuss what's going on, atmosphere, service, and food, without the intent of supporting or not supporting the restaurant, but really talking about what it is in real time and then reporting that.
When you're going into a restaurant and you have your camera probably a foot away from you because you do your own shooting, right?
Yes, I do.
People must, if they don't know who you are exactly, they know what you're doing, right?
Yes.
If you're doing a completely honest review, and the reason I use that term is because I was the reviewer for Honolulu Advertiser, which is Hawaii's largest newspaper. No one ever knew who I was, and they knew my name, but they never knew my identity. So I'm just afraid that when I was doing that, had I had a camera in my face, they would have known who I was. So is that happening with you now, where people are starting to recognize you, or they feel a little bit awkward because there's a guy sitting at the bar or at a table with a camera on himself, or is everyone just so used to everyone having a camera?
Yes and no. People do know who I am, generally speaking. Some people don't. I don't ask, or don't tell. So people know who I am, and it hasn't been awkward for me. Some people pose the challenge. Well, they know you're coming. They're going to do everything perfect. And I'll say this: a good reviewer, I think, if they know they're known, they're going to look around to see if the same level of service is being offered to other guests. They're going to look at the other plates of food that's being offered to see, is it the same? Is it similar? And these are just little things that I try and do whenever I'm in a restaurant, is just be hyper observant. And also I realize that if you aren't doing things consistently on a high level basis, and I just show up, you're not going to be able to pull that out of a hat all of a sudden to make it perfect. You're either going to be there or not. And so I think there's a lot of stereotypes with that. They're just going to make it perfect for you, but it's easier said than done.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Had they known who I was all those years, they would have brought on the dancing girls and the lobster tails, I'm sure.
Yes. And this is something that I did through psychology, and this has helped me grow immensely. I'll look at a menu just to look at the menu, but I no longer order off the menu. I tell the waiter, I want X amount of appetizer sides. There's no restrictions. And I'm blessed not to have any allergies. But whenever I go there, I want the essence of the restaurant. And so either the restaurant is going to be, even the manager or whomever they talk to is just going to bring out whatever. I do it completely random.
That's a very interesting style, because the things that are coming to me is that if they're bringing you what the waiter is suggesting, you're really trusting your waiter to have the skills and the knowledge base to be able to prefer certain dishes over others. Is that something that you find that service is at an adequate level enough to be able to have a wait staffer be able to suggest to you what to eat?
Well, I look at it like this. If that restaurant trained their wait staff appropriately, the wait staff would know the essence of that restaurant. So when a wait staff says, I'm just bringing you what I like, what type of training outside of the basic has gone into it, which is fine. And so, what I've always viewed it like, I don't want them to bring me something that I don't I know I want them to bring me something new. I want them to bring me the restaurant. How well does the wait staff have invested in the restaurant to know the restaurant? And so it doesn't bother me very much because again, I'm open to everything. Even if I personally don't like it, I can still love if it's executed well and it's amazing flavor profiles.
Right, right. Would you see, just your personal opinion, if there is any sort of a weak link in a restaurant, that it's always at the service level?
Service or atmosphere, more so than food. Um,
Yeah, I can understand that, but atmosphere is something you can say, okay, well, at least the food is good. But I'm just wondering, do your servers that you've been noticing, because I've been out of the food writing game for a few years,
mhm,
I always noticed that they just really didn't have the knowledge base. They didn't know where the fish was from. They didn't know even if it was fresh.
mhm.
They would just go based on what was going to put more money in their pocket because it was a higher priced item. Are you seeing any of that? Do you sense any of that happening still?
Let's unpack the two things, but let's go back to atmosphere because I can tie that back to psychology.
Good.
I do see that to an extent, but I don't see anyone pushing anything onto me that I used to see 5 years ago. It was big pushing the steak onto someone else. I don't see that nearly as much. What I see is the service industry is really struggling just to find people willing to work in the industry, and there's multiple levels. First, a livable wage is a concern. A lot of these restaurants, especially local ones, they're razor thin margins. They might bring out this foie gras, this not foie gras, this Wagyu steak that's you're paying $200 for. The restaurant might only pay $120 for it, and they're like, "Well, that's $20 they're getting for that." That's when you think of overhead and everything. That's not a whole lot of profit margin. And so right
Right.
now, the service is really, and just part of it is really being hit hard. And I find that the chains are generally the worst, and that's why I stick to local because the local ones care for their servers so much more and I get so much better service.
Are you finding that restaurants are still pretty much, because the margins are so razor thin, like you say, and I agree, do you
Mhm.
find that they do push alcohol and cocktails and wines and things like that? Because that's really the difference maker between a restaurant that is going to survive and one that will not.
Absolutely. So some of them I do, some of them I do not. Right now in Oklahoma, the trend is private wine dinners or special wine dinners hosted once a month by restaurants. That's huge. Wine is, and it's where the chef gets to curate their own prefix menu or 10-course tasting, and then they pair wines with it. That's massive right now. It lets the chef's creativity flourish. It allows the wine industry to be shown in Oklahoma because we have some great growers here. And so, yes, alcohol plays a significant role. Yes. I do want to go back to the atmosphere, is what you're talking
Yeah,
about. Mental health, anxiety is an all time high right now.
right.
And a lot of people are struggling with crowds, they're struggling with noise. Well, if somebody with anxiety goes into a restaurant and it is a lively restaurant and they're not expecting that, or it's a lively restaurant and they struggle with these things, their anxiety is going to spike. And when your anxiety spikes, other senses dull because you're in fight or flight subconsciously. And so, even if the food is good, you might not remember it or you might think it sucks, even though you know you liked it, because all you're focusing on is how uncomfortable you are because of the atmosphere. And I think that's happening at a high level at a lot of places because so many people, especially since COVID, are dealing with so many more anxieties at higher levels as a society. So it's just something
Right.
I want to
Yeah.
throw in. Sorry about that.
No, that's
Circle
good.
back.
We were talking about that the other day, is that many people will take the same $20 that they might spend at a meal, but
Mm-hmm.
they'll drive through a fast food place and bring that food home because they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to put themselves in the company of others or the public or the
Yeah.
restaurant operators and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Are you seeing people starting to grow out of whatever COVID dread that they've been going through when it comes to going to restaurants and frequenting places that they might like?
Yes, because COVID for Oklahoma, we're a very conservative state, so that the stay at home was not a huge priority for us as a state, more so than some other states. But still, the anxiety is there,
Right.
especially in the young kids. As
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Were the rates in line with the lack of anxiety? I mean, there's a psychological question for you.
the rates in Oklahoma are higher. We have some of the highest mental health issues as a state in the United States, especially with depression.
Right. And why do you think that is?
A couple of things is we have high levels of tobacco use, high levels of alcoholism, and as you know, alcohol is a depressant, whether we like to
Right.
admit it in or not. High issues of mental health, our history and cultural trail of tears, indigenous people from this society, and there's a lot of finally socioeconomic status. We're a very impoverished state, and our education is 49th in the United States for the last 30 years. It
Wow,
really
no
does
kidding.
struggle. Yes. Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize that at all.
Well, let me recorrect. I think for 2 years in there, we might have hit in the teens, but
Okay.
for I think 2 out of the last 30 years, we've been 48 to 51st.
One of the interesting facts that I learned about Oklahoma was that on per capita basis, there was a higher number of pot dispensaries than anywhere else in the country. Can you make any sense of that?
Sure. Well, it's capitalism, and it's just pure capitalism. Whenever it was legalized, it was not regulated at all, particularly. And so, whenever it's not regulated, that means you don't have to go through as many hoops. That means you can open it up, but then more problems come. And so,
Right.
recently they've clamped down, and so that's hopefully going down for the. But at the same time, that's why there wasn't much regulations put on it.
Yeah, I heard that the numbers have dipped dramatically since
Yeah.
maybe 5 years ago or so.
Yeah, because they've said enough is enough. We're going to, if you haven't been following these rules, well, let me rephrase. The regulations might have been there, but it was not being enforced. I'm told it's being enforced more now.
Okay. But getting back to the food for a second, before you sit and enjoy the food that your waiter has suggested to you, you then take a look at the menu and see what it is that they brought you and
Oh, yeah.
assess in some way the biological, the psychological, and the cultural factors of those foods and how you'll respond to that.
Oh, absolutely. Because then I'm intrigued to see. At first, I want to take a bite to see what if I can figure out and identify what's going on there. Then I take a look at the menu, and it's not like I don't look at the menu. It's just I don't generally order from the menu. And so once I do, I'm like, well, I can see where their mind was at. I can see what the influences are. I can see, and I'm more or less interested to see if I ask the waiter. I always tell the waiter, you're more than welcome to get with the chef or the manager to collaborate, because if I'm told the chef has put it together, then I'm wondering, did they try and put something cohesive, a little mini prefix right in the middle of this restaurant that doesn't normally do that?
Right. Obviously,
Yeah.
if you were brought out a bunch of dishes that didn't contrast in any way
Yeah.
and were like too similar, you would be disappointed in your waiter or somebody, right?
I would be disappointed, but at the same time, I'm still going to critique it the way it is, because I
Uh-huh.
can't I can't fault them for that. But on personally, I can be a little disappointed, but it generally hasn't happened, and could be because I'm a little more known now. And also, I think that too often chefs get in a rut just like anyone else. If people, or if they're, if steak is the most popular thing on the menu that's ordered all the time, it's boring. So if somebody comes along that gives them a little challenge, a little variety, is that spice of life. So it's been better. I've had more instances of good than not.
As a child growing up and a young adult, were there any established patterns to your taste buds that you had to overcome and try to develop a taste for, especially since now you've become somebody who's reviewing restaurants on a professional basis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I grew up in Maine, my childhood, and
Uh-huh.
ironically, I didn't care for shrimp. I didn't care for whitefish. I had a personal bias towards those. And the last 3 years running, my top 10 dishes of the year, five of them have been seafood based: scallops, sea bass. Oh, what's it called? Oh, not cod,
Uh-huh.
butterfish, shrimp, langoustines. I was dumbfounded when I had salmon for the first time in my life reinvented, because I had it at a time when I was just like, oh, this is horrible. And then I had it through a professional chef, and it was just blew my mind out, because I had and this was 4 years ago, preconceived notion that was from my childhood of what I thought salmon was. I had no idea what salmon truly was in the hands of someone that knows what to do with salmon. The same goes
Right.
with sardines. I about a year ago had fresh preserved sardines, where the restaurant preserved the sardines themselves and did their own fermentation. My goodness, my goodness, it was so far removed from what I had as 13 when in a can. I was like, what is this? It was
Right.
incredible. And just rediscovering these things and getting over my own personal bias was so wonderful. And it all started with food.
That is very cool when you can do that, when your taste buds can mature along
Mm-hmm.
with your knowledge base, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what are some of the greatest dishes you've had, let's just say this year, because we're almost through 24 and you've really, really kind of turned it up on your
Uh-huh.
videos and your visitations to places. So what's some of the great dishes that you've had?
Well, one of the best dishes I had was at the meat and cheese show. It was a dinner, and they did a Joe Robuchon potato puree, which is absolutely not healthy in the sense it's butter and potatoes, but they did a croquette out of it where they made it almost like a big ball and they fried it. And when you cut into it, it oozed out. But then they had a beautiful tenderloin, perfectly medium rare, that was smoked, and it was divine with a little bit of caviar on top. So that was huge. Another one was something I recently had. It was a butterfish. It was a cod with a coconut curry foam, and underneath it was a squash puree. And just the butter, the squash, the sweet essence of coconut was such an incredible flavor combination. I'm trying to think of some others. In Chicago, I had a nest egg. Or, I'm sorry, I had a Legion Field lamb with sweet bread. So you had that earthiness from the sweet breads. Then you had the lamb with a glaze that was perfection. And then they had a butter bread that was coated in a caramel foie gras. So sweet. It was
Wow.
wonderful. So those are some of the three that just stand out. But so it's a spectrum of some of the bites I've had. Doesn't have to come from some of the most expensive restaurants in the United States, is what I realized. Because I'd say on my top 10 worst bites I've had this year, 5 of those 10 are going to come from 2 and 3 Michelin-star establishments.
And how much of that do you think is expectations not being met?
So it could be expectations not being met, but it's also all about flavor combinations and flavor profiles. And I'm all about descriptors. So if you let me, I can sort of guide you through a bite. Are you interested in that?
Absolutely.
All right, close your eyes. You've just had a meal where we really like to infuse the land and the sea. And finally, I'm going to hand you a caramel. You're going to open the caramel up. You're going to look. The caramel has almost a faint anise smell to it. You bite into the caramel. It's sweet. You can taste the butter and you can feel it coat your mouth as you know it's pure caramel. Quickly, the caramel starts to fade as you chew, and you have this bitter taste, almost burnt, with anise coming through strong. And then as the end notes that come through strong at the anise, you taste mussels and sea with your sweet caramel, along with the fusion of anise, all culminating in not sweet but bitter. Are you picturing it?
Yes.
Does it taste good the way you're picturing it, particularly?
It tastes very interesting. It sounds like it's a little bit of an examination for my mind and my
Mhm.
brain to put that together with my taste buds.
Yes. And so I love that. And for me and for a lot of people, it did not work out. And it's
Uh-huh.
not that it's not interesting. It's licorice, mussels, scallops, seaweed flavor with buttery caramel. And it's all in a little caramel is brilliant conception, doesn't necessarily work. And so I
It's a
think that,
tough audience to take on those kind of flavors and to be able to
well,
establish them in their
absolutely.
brain. That sounds like a molecular invention.
It is a molecular invention. And just, some of the things they did one where they did a fermented banana, but it was a banana mousse, but it had no banana. It was derived from seaweed.
Uh-huh.
Again, the essence of banana was there, but there were some really stringent flavor profiles that were not balanced well. And I think that it's high risk, high reward. You had the chance for that bite to be brilliant, brand new perfection, or you had the bite, it missed the mark. And the issue then becomes, and I think this is challenging, is if you're paying $600 for the meal and you have 10 courses and 5 of them you're in toe curling heaven, transcendent bites, but 5 of them, you're in the depths of, oh my goodness, it balances out in not necessarily the best ways.
People who can't afford molecular dinners, and that's
Mhm.
most, I'll usually tell people you should try it one time at the very least in your
Yep,
life so you know what it's about. It's very theatrical
it
and
is.
it's totally worth it. And then afterwards, you need to go to like McDonald's or Jack in the
Mhm.
Box and finish yourself off because it won't be enough food. It won't even be close.
No, it won't, generally speaking. The one thing about these restaurants that I've been to, they have been enough food, which is really nice.
That's unusual.
It is unusual, but it's also, I think, perfectly spaced. Whenever you get past 10 courses, a lot of the places are about 10 to 15. It does, you do start to fill up because it's over 3 hours and your body's slowly digesting. And so I've been very fortunate with those restaurants. Only about one in the last 2 years, I've been like, let's go to McDonald's after, because that thought exactly happens, especially
Yeah.
if you're not full.
There's a
And
lot of that diner's remorse for people who can't really afford it. And they're expecting, I guess they're expecting some sort of an equilibrium point between the
Mhm.
cost of the food and how satisfied they are. And
Absolutely, you just said
satisfaction,
it.
satisfaction comes in a lot of different ways, but a lot of people are trained to have enough to feel a fullness to
Mhm.
tell them that they're satisfied instead of just being able to delight in the art and the craft and all that.
Absolutely. It's everything. It's an experience, as you said. And I sort of squared off in my mind of, um, in some ways, it's akin to gambling. I think that's where people are so comfortable with going to Texas Roadhouse and ordering the same thing, because for the money that they work hard for and money's tight, they're going to get what they like each and every time. But again, you're putting yourself into a pattern in a box. And the question is, if you're okay with that? Absolutely. If you're not, we can make some changes here or there.
All the years that I've been a chef and a food writer and all
Mhm.
that person, and people will say, "Oh, I love food so much," and I'll say, "Yeah, what's a couple places that you go to? I want to know where they go." And people just can't name it, or they feel a little bit intimidated to say, "Well, we like the Olive Garden," or
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But it's so interesting to hear that people who love food, and that's all of us, they wouldn't name it or don't name the places that they go to because I guess, like you said, their choices of places to go and have a dinner is very, very small.
Oh, absolutely. I just did a review recently on a steakhouse, and people were saying that's overpriced. Take me to Texas Roadhouse. That is absolutely overpriced. I wouldn't try it. And all I can think of is you're missing out on some incredible things. But
Right.
also, I get it, because if you don't put the value in a $100 steak, then that is not the place for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how you square that in your mind is that Texas Roadhouse that's $24.99 for 50 ounces. That's the best steak ever. Is it?
Oh my gosh. And for the whole week afterwards.
Yes. And the question is it? It's probably not a particularly good steak by all indicators of steak, but it's something that you feel comfortable affording, and you have to square it in your mind to build it up, because Texas Roadhouse doesn't sound as good as, say, Ruth Chris, ultimately,
Yeah,
period, whenever you put the two together.
sure. Jared, when you go out and you do a review,
Mhm.
you're not pre-announcing yourself. Are you, or are you
No,
using your real name to make a reservation? How does that whole thing work?
so I do use because I'm through Yelp and all of that, and I haven't created a dummy account, because here's the issue. A lot of these places require you to purchase the reservation ahead of time,
Right,
$20
right.
down, and so I have to make my name a tie to my credit card, so it's not going to work. So, but whenever I get to the restaurant, I usually tag myself in the location and take a picture, and that's about it.
When I was writing restaurant reviews, I actually had a different credit card and always used a
Yeah.
different name because I think part of the thing in journalism is that a true critique, no one ever knows in advance, and you
Mhm.
can't accept free stuff if they do happen to figure it out
Mhm.
and all of that. Do you find yourself being bound by any of those old rules?
I generally don't. If somebody, I had meals that have been comped. If they've comped a meal, I've either asked them to please just go ahead and charge me for it. But if they don't, then I would leave a tip that I try and make it commensurate with what the meal would cost. So I'm going to
Right.
try and give it back either way. I did have one expensive meal comped, and I didn't change my review. They got what they got. They were disappointed until I posted the review, and they then started to get phone calls. But I've realized a while ago that, if something is comped, I'm just willing to announce and say this review is with comped, take it or leave it. And this is something that I've realized. If people don't like that somebody comped me, or somebody says something negative, I can't control other people's thoughts or opinions, and I'm not going to allow
Right.
another person to steal my glory. And finally, I will not allow someone else to put their feelings onto my intent. And I
Yeah.
think that that is something that all of society can benefit from, is that philosophy is never allow someone to hijack your emotions, and do not allow another to put their feelings on your intent.
Very good word. When you're going out, are you dining solo?
Sometimes I like to sometimes put a group together. I like to, if I
Uh-huh.
can find a lovely young lady to go with me, I would love that. But a lot of times it is solo, and that just gives me the opportunity to converse with people while I'm out. One of the
Right,
best
right.
things that I have is, I order a lot of food when I go out, and I'm not going to eat it all. If it's in well, not bar, like I don't generally go to bars, but if I'm at a bar seating at a restaurant and there's people beside me and I order a big platter, something, I said, "Would you like to try this on the house?" Because I view it as maybe they might try something they wouldn't otherwise order. Maybe I can help someone else discover something new. And how rewarding would that be?
It's so funny because the whole thing about food, the best part about food is breaking bread with people you care
It
about,
is,
whose
yes.
eyes you can look in, whose information within you can kind of study and generalize on where they're coming from. And, all of the human stuff
Mhm.
is the best part of eating. And it's interesting to me when I watch YouTube, there's so many individual people doing reviews and basically just eating on camera, and they're not connecting with another person, which I find as the viewer or spectator, I want to see the scene of you and I speaking when we're eating,
Yeah.
not just me eating. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something I struggle with because I'm usually out solo, so it's hard for me to get the video. But I would have loved to pitch something to Food Network, and that's essentially blind critique, a review, a place called a show called Blind Critique, where two critics, one you could say is professional, the other one could be a food influencer, goes into a restaurant, and they could go essentially head to head critiquing to see what the final score is for the restaurant and just see the byplay. I think that would be a lot of fun
That really
for
would be.
for a TV show.
I've seen sommeliers do that
Yeah.
where, they'll be speaking about wines or they'll be doing a taste of the same wine, but every
Uh-huh.
5 years, like a
Yep.
selection or collection of five of the same wines from 5 different years. And they'll identify color and aroma and flavor and taste and profiles. And the same kind of thing like what you're talking about would work as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that would be a lot of fun. Different perspectives, same bite of food, same time.
Have you always been a foodie?
Uh, as far as I can remember,
Uh-huh.
as far as I
And
can
what were
remember.
some of your favorite childhood foods before you started getting into your foams and your mousses and your
I'm not
foie
gonna
gras?
lie, Kraft macaroni and cheese was a
There
guilty
you
pleasure,
go.
but my dad would make scrambled eggs with real butter. Oh, scrambled eggs with real butter. And then he'd make pies, blueberry pie, pumpkin pie with the crust that was whole, ice water, a little salt, butter, and flour, and that's all I knew. I didn't know. And whipped cream was just whipped cream on that pie from a cow. These are all the things that I grew up on. Whoopie pies was a big one.
Right.
So those are
Oh,
the
well,
things. Yeah.
whoopie pie is like a thing from Maine, though, right? Not from
Maine and
Oklahoma.
Pennsylvania. So my father and mother are both born Pennsylvania Dutch, and then they moved to Maine. And so that's sort of start.
So I'm certain that you must have had shoe fly pie as a kid.
Oh, shoe fly pie, pecan pie. I love shoe fly pie. That molasses, that sort of, I want to say gummy, but it's a fusion of something it's baked almost like a brownie-ish sort of thing, and then you have the gooiness in between. It's so good.
Yeah, it's
It's so
gooey,
good.
dark, sweet, almost smoky.
Oh,
It's
it's
it's pretty amazing, right?
wonderful. It is. Yes, it is. It is so good.
I'm assuming that your dad was the primary cook in the family.
He was. Yes, he
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
And did he have any specialties, or was it just like anything and everything like what you just mentioned?
Pies. Pies were his specialty. Shoe fly, pecan, lemon meringue, coconut,
Uh-huh.
pumpkin, blueberry. He was big into blueberry.
So now when Jared gets into the kitchen, he's not out with his camera going to other people's places. What are you making for yourself, or what are you making for your friends?
So if I make for my friends, I do Friendsgiving every year. And so this year we're going to do lamb Wellington. And so that's what I'm going to do. I always do a lobster bisque that I make every year. I've got all the ingredients. I've got a couple pounds of lobster shells ready to make the stock. If I'm just by myself, honestly, fresh pasta, butter, Parmesan cheese, pasta water, Alfredo. That's it. Less than
Yep.
$2 in ingredients, 10 minutes.
Right. Yeah, most of us who are really into the food, when we cook for ourselves, it's not as intricate as people would think.
No, it's not. If I do a sandwich, I'm going to do a fried egg, some avocado or some tomato and a little bit of bacon. There you go. Easy peasy, and it's really good.
See, I do exactly that, Jared, except I don't have the bread. So I'll have the egg and the cheese, but no bread. So that's so interesting that
Oh, I
we
love
both
that.
kind of choose the same thing.
Yeah. It's good, simple food that is done that it's hard to mess up. My friend was like, I've got ramen. What do you want ramen? I said, well, just add some Parmesan cheese butter to it and just stir, stir, stir. And he's like, that can't taste good. I'm like, when I did it for him, he's like, this is incredible. And I said, no, it's all there is to, man. So it's even getting people to realize it's that simple. And that's so much better than craft.
Oh, yeah. However, that does occupy quite the heart space in millions and millions of people, right?
Absolutely. Even mine.
Yeah.
It took me a while to get over that love affair.
Oh, yeah. Right. Fortunately, I may have flirted with it, but it never really became a long range love affair for me personally.
Lucky you, because it's hard to get away from.
Oh, I know. So what are some of your next places that you have lined up? Would we know the names of any of these, or are they certain types of places that you're going to?
One of them's for my birthday. I'm turning 40 this year. It's going to be in Tulsa at a place called the Copper Dome.
Okay.
And I'm really excited to see what's going on there, sourcing local ingredients. Another one is in Oklahoma City. It's called The Crown, and he's someone that includes spraying the air to perfume the air with certain, I don't want to say perfumes, but concentrates of food. It's all about five senses for dining for him, and I find that fascinating. So those are the two things that are big. And finally, a local chef named Jeff Chanchaloon is opening a new restaurant called Bar Sen. He's been nominated for James Beard 4 years in a row, I believe, and he's opening
in Oklahoma.
And it's Laotian food.
Oh, fantastic. I love Laotian food.
Yes.
It's going to be very, very saucy. I think you really could like that.
It's truly incredible. Lime, fish sauce, a little bit of coconut. It's so good. Shallots.
Where is the Laotian restaurant?
Oklahoma City. It's called Ma Der Lao Kitchen.
Modern Lao?
Yeah, Ma Der Lao.
Ma Der Lao. Wow, that's fantastic. Well, yeah. I'll be looking forward to seeing that video of yours.
Absolutely.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Is there anything that I haven't asked you, Jared, about food or psychology or the combination of the two that we should know?
Nope. That was about it. The only other thing is I do have a book out, and that's about it.
Tell us about the book.
Oh, it's called A Feast for the Senses, The Psychological Art of Eating Well. It's on Amazon. There's an audiobook version for those who do not care for reading traditionally. And it just sort of details the journey. It includes food reviews. It includes some recipes that I picked up along the way, including that Alfredo recipe. And so it talks about my weight loss journey and our biases. So it hits everything we talked about here today.
Good. Yeah, that sounds like a really great kind of framing of your past, your present, and how you got here.
Yeah, and I try and tie it the end of the book to the beginning of the book, but also to set up the future.
Thank you so much for joining me on 50 Tastes of Great, Jared Gleaton. It's been really nice and tasty speaking with you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm glad we were able to see a lot of color in the gray as well.
Oh, you bet. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you for your time.